Yes, hello folks, welcome to the Global Football Show, our very first live show. Joined here with my regular co-host, the excellent Zach Louie. Don't forget to check Zach out at Zach Louie, and of course his fantastic website at Breaking the Lines. Before I say hello to Zach, I want to add there's a piece of bonus content. We spoke with Ollie K earlier. We'll add that into either the beginning or the end of the show when we upload it to the podcast. So you'll be able to download that. If you just follow us, download the podcast, you'll be able to hear that. We talked about Mikel Arteta a little bit. We talked about PSG. We talked a little bit about Qataris and what that would look like with the Manchester United ownership and a few other things. We talked about VAR in England. But before we get on to our topics today, I want to say, how you doing, Zach?
Doing very well, Phil. Got a lot to discuss from Brazil to Italy, so really excited. And yeah, definitely a reminder to check out our interview with Oliver Kay. It was great to speak with one of the leading journalists in England. But yeah, very excited for today's action. Very excited for the final Primera Liga match of the weekend with Famalicão Casapia. So yeah, excited for the weekend's roundup, and we've got a lot of stuff to discuss. So let's get into it.
Yeah, don't forget, folks, coming up this week, we'll also have Jonathan Johnson on, the fantastic Jonathan Johnson. We'll talk a bit about Reims and their young manager, who is doing fantastic work out there. We'll talk a little bit about the Ashraf Hakimi stuff, the Nasser Khalifi stuff. We will also have on this podcast Sean Derry, who is the Crystal Palace Academy Director. And we're going to talk a lot about what Premier League academies are looking for these days in young kids, what it looks like at that level, and he's going to take us a behind the scenes look at Premier League Academy. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Lots of things to talk about today, as you quite rightly said. Also, want to start on this podcast. We're going to shoehorn this in because it's been such a big discussion, a big topic in the UK at the moment. That's the suspension and then the reappointment of Gary Lineker for primarily expressing a view that depending on where you stand on the political spectrum, depends on how it was received. I'll give my view on this first. 2 months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, we had the Qatar World Cup, and that rightly brought into focus Qatar's social issues with human rights. And it was probably the first time where we've seen that really done in a World Cup, where a country has been awarded a competition and there are, to that degree, and I think partly that's because of social media, where it's been highlighted to such a degree, where it had such an intense focus, and it was rightly criticised, as it should be. The consequence of that means that that will now be the norm for everybody. England wants to host the Euros, and they're rightly going to have things like the fact that they want to withdraw from the European Court of Human Rights adjudicated in public. You're going to have things like the US socially going to get parsed through a very difficult lens with their social issues, and this is going to be the norm. Now, if Gary Lineker works in news, and Gary Lineker is doing this on a news channel, then I think there's culpability. I think your job as a broadcaster, if you're in the news, is to inform. It's not to tell people how to feel about something. It is to have a level of neutrality and broadcast the news as it's presented, and then you decide how you feel about it. That's used to be what the news was. Now, of course, it's partisan nonsense. Gary Lineker spoke outside his capacity as a BBC presenter and expressed views that were commensurate with people who've experienced this. I mean, we've had people who experienced the Holocaust completely agree with him. We've had German historians completely agree with him. And of course, it perturbed those on the right. The BBC are trying to thread the needle of neutrality, which I think is very difficult to do and very difficult to parse when one of the heads of the BBC facilitated an £800,000 loan for Boris Johnson and have been criticised for lying to protect the Conservative Party. I've been criticised by numerous people for, when there was a recent programme on where Boris Johnson's father who broke his wife's nose, and BBC shut down that discussion quite quickly. It isn't an easy needle to thread when it comes to impartiality because everything's so partisan today. But what was your take on this?
I have to say, growing up in the United States, I always felt that BBC was the pinnacle of journalism. It was something that you respected, and that clearly was the cream of the crop. So I was incredibly proud when I finally got the chance to appear on BBC this past year, both on radio and television. So as somebody who has a ton of respect for BBC and what they've achieved, I was incredibly disappointed with this. I think that as a company that seeks to provide news and analysis on current events, to suspend one of your broadcasters for voicing an opinion that is shared by many people who have suffered through these migrant abuses, I think it's just completely ridiculous. And I think that it really showcases double standards, because if Gary Lineker were a conservative or a Tory instead of a Labour Party member, if he were to have voiced an opinion supporting the government in their policy against migrants, I highly doubt the BBC would have taken any action whatsoever. And yet, here we are. He voices an opinion that is shared by plenty of people in the Labour Party, plenty of people who have gone through these horrific experiences, and yet somehow he's the one who's in the wrong, not the British government for these completely draconian anti-migrant policies. No, it's Gary Lineker. And for the BBC to completely overstep their boundaries and suggest that they as a company have authority over what their presenter says, I think it's absolutely heinous and it's absolutely ridiculous. And frankly, it was something that was more reminiscent of state-run television in Soviet Russia or North Korea, more than something that you'd expect from a supposedly free and peaceful country like England. So yeah, really disappointed by the way the BBC have handled this. But I have to say, I think that it is a positive moment overall, because we have seen Lineker's colleagues and people who may have co-hosted Match of the Day and have links with the BBC really stand up for him. I know that he's been somewhat of a punching bag at times, and not everybody agrees with him. But to have so many people from so many different walks of life, I saw that Nigel Pearson was speaking up for him. So to have so many people come to his defense, I really think it speaks volumes, and it's a positive moment. And hopefully BBC and some of these other news outlets, they are going to stop being so concerned over limiting their employees' free speech and so concerned over treading the line and trying to appease one side or the other. Because frankly, if you try too hard to do that, I think at a certain point you end up satisfying nobody, and you end up really hurting the people who you employ.
So I've got a couple of things to say about this. One of the things that I will say is Simon Jordan accused Gary Lineker of virtue signaling. Well, to me, the antithesis of virtue signaling is when you're willing to pay a price to defend your values, right? When you're not willing to pay a price to defend your values, such as we're not going to wear this armband because you make it a yellow card, that's virtue signaling to me. But what was encouraging to me, and whether you agree with Gary Lineker or not, the fact that there were so many people across so many different spectrums willing to sacrifice their occupation and their income to support Gary Lineker is encouraging to me, because at least these are people that are willing to have the convictions of their actions and defend their values. So if on the flip side of that, what I will say is, when you work for a big company, you have certain codes of conduct of things you can and can't say on social media, right? I worked for a large broadcaster, I'm not going to name them, and I got censored for something I said online, on Twitter, which would be entirely consistent with what Gary Lineker said. The problem is it applied to the wrong people who didn't have political capital, who there was no social consequence for defaming these people. And so there is certainly cause celebs where they pick certain causes that are dear to them and certain ones that aren't. For example, Saturday Night Live, who I've always tried to claim they have a moral compass, decided to release a skit this weekend where they have Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell, someone act on their behalf. And the skit, I must confess, is entirely tiresome. It was drunk, belligerent Irish that can't be understood. It's still up there. Now, I'm quite certain if that was about anyone else that had political capital or social capital, that would be abhorrent and completely unacceptable. So there's no question that some of these causes depends on who you talk about, not necessarily the sentiment that you express, but depends on who you talk about and whether you are going to take abuse for that and take criticism for that. So in that sense, I do understand people saying, okay, well, be consistent, because you have put things out about other people. And I don't want to do a whataboutery here, but certain people aren't treated with the same sensitivities.
Absolutely, 100%. I think that the double standards, the hypocrisy, all this, it's just incredibly sickening. And I think you make a great point, right? There are certain groups that, you can say this stuff about and others that you can't. But frankly, I didn't think that the comments that Lineker made, I just can't see why
Yeah, I agree.
someone like BBC would take such severe action. They honestly did not seem. It seemed like he was mentioning the language in the migrant bill, comparing it to the language used in the Holocaust. So yeah, I don't see why we keep having to hear from the same people who keep putting this a plastic bullseye on their face, right? They keep trying to act like they're the victim. They're not. These migrants who are going through these life-threatening conditions, those are the victims, not the conservative politician who's making all sorts of money and has a comfortable house. Frankly, they are not the victims. Okay, so I think to just completely blackball Gary Lineker like the BBC attempted to do over the past week, it was completely despicable. I hope that they have learned from their error, and I hope that Gary Lineker feels at liberty to say whatever he feels, because frankly, the double standards, they're just completely sickening.
Well, I mean, the other aspect of this, we'll move on from this topic, we're going to do something a little bit more fun, is now they want David Attenborough taken off because climate change is offensive. It's okay to go through life getting offended. You have no right not to go through life getting offended. You can say you found it offensive, but you shouldn't ask for it to be removed because it offends you. I think that is totally ridiculous to pander to that. But anyway, it's something that will keep running, and we will see what happens. Let's move on to something more fun. I want to move over to Napoli, because probably the most exciting team to watch in Europe. And one of the things that I was thinking was a little bit unfair on this, Zach, is that we lost Diego Maradona. Was it 2 years ago?
Yes, I believe it was November 2020.
Yeah.
If memory serves. November 2021, I think.
So Maradona will have got to miss Messi lifting a World Cup, and would have got to miss watching a Napoli team that he would have loved win the Scudetto. It's not just a victory for Napoli, it's a victory for the South over the North, because it'll be the first team from the South since Napoli won it since 1990. And Spalletti has done an unbelievable job. This shouldn't be happening when you think about what happened with Napoli over the summer. They lost Dries Mertens, they lost Koulibaly. Their sporting director, Cristiano Giuntoli, has done an unbelievable job. I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful here, but I hadn't really heard of Kim Min-jae before he came from Fenerbahce. They sang Kivica Kvaradana from Dinamo Batumi. Unbelievable. I love watching this kid. And They got rid of Insigne, got rid of Mertens. Osimhen's got 19 and 22 games. I mean, they are just amazing to watch.
Yeah, you mentioned the North versus South divide, and I think that's really interesting because as somebody who has Southern Italian roots, both in Naples and Sicily, I've always been told by my family members that there is kind of a almost a superiority complex between Northern Italians and Southern Italians. They almost feel like people from the North feel like they are better than people from the South. And we've seen that translate in many aspects of Italian culture. And of course, these past few decades have been dominated by teams from the North, whether that's Juventus, Inter, Milan, Roma, Lazio. And finally, we are seeing a team from the South leading a charge. And it's just great to see it. Napoli, they've had quite an interesting decade or so. I think it was just about 10 years ago that Maurizio Sarri took charge and really led them to a fantastic run of form, but ultimately was unable to end that Scudetto drought. And you felt like, after so many collapses under the Sarri teams, you felt like, if not now, when? When is it going to happen for Napoli? Past few years, it's been, I think, in many ways, Napoli holding on to a lot of remnants of that Sarri team, and we saw them operate under various different managers such as Gennaro Gattuso, Carlo Ancelotti, but ultimately unable to get off that hump. Last season, they were in a three-horse race, ultimately falling off the wheels. The wheels fell off on their charge, and it was Inter and Milan going at it for the Scudetto up until the final day of the season. So I think at that point, just another collapse. Aurelio De Laurentiis, in his mind, he's thinking, you know what? Maybe the mental fatigue and trauma from all of these collapses, maybe it's just taken so much of a toll, and it's just going to be impossible for us to ever get over the hump with and until we take off the band-aid, if you will. So I think we saw something really interesting happen with Napoli this past summer. Seeing so many key players leave. Kalidou Koulibaly, I'd imagine that Napoli would have wanted to keep hold of him despite his age, but frankly, I think that they arguably upgraded with Kim Min-jae. He has been absolutely phenomenal in the heart of defense alongside Amir Rahmani. Plenty of other players such as David Ospina, and Fabian Ruiz going to Paris Saint-Germain, Lorenzo Insigne, Dries Mertens. Plenty of players who you would have expected to have hurt them with their departures, but it looks like Napoli have really only gone up another level, and I think that what that is you're getting new players who are eager to prove themselves. A lot of players who are playing for a career revival almost, and just players who I think are eager to make their mark. Khvicha Kvaratskhelia is 100% the epitome of this. A player who had spent quite a few years in Russia without really drawing too much attention, ends up going back to his native Georgia, Dynamo Batumi, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and doesn't spend too much time there. Goes to Napoli, and a lot of Napoli fans at that point, they were expecting him to be loaned out to play a secondary role in attack. Goes out and has a fantastic start to the campaign and really forces Luciano Spalletti's hand. And it is obvious to say that he has been an upgrade over Insigne in that left wing position. The partnership that he has developed with Victor Osimhen, it's just been phenomenal to watch. I think that in many ways, Osimhen and Kvaratskhelia, they are almost two throwbacks. I think Quaradona, he seems like an old-fashioned traditional winger who's just out there to entertain people, right? He don't get me wrong, he definitely has the end product to his game. He's fantastic at getting himself into goal-scoring scenarios and finding a way into the back of the net, as we saw at the weekend against Atalanta, going past 8 players on his own and opening the scoring. And then you've got a player like Osimhen, who I just think is really kind of like a blast from the past, a traditional center forward. But with that being said, he's so complete. He's a player who I've been following since he was in Belgium. Had a great season at Charleroi, and it's been a really meteoric rise for him. He impressed at a youth tournament, I believe the U17 World Cup for Nigeria. Got a move from Nigeria to Wolfsburg. Didn't really manage to make his mark there, and by the time he had joined Charleroi from Wolfsburg, his body had actually been weakened so much by malaria that there were several Belgian clubs that were not taking a chance on him. So he ends up going to Charleroi, ends up having a fantastic year, gets to move to Lille and replaces Rafael Leao. And alongside Leao has eventually become one of the best players in Serie A since leaving Lille and joining Napoli. He really has it all. He's active, out of possession. He's an aerial duel monster. And, for a player of his size and strength, he's really clean in terms of his first touch, his technique. He's a relentless player who I think there are few sights scarier for a defender than seeing Victor Osimhen charging down on you and you have to make a split decision. So, yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that he is already one of the best center forwards in world football. I think that Napoli have pulled off a tremendous bit of business, paying a significant fee for him, and one that they knew was going to pay off, because when they do sell him, whether that's this summer, next summer, whenever, I have no doubt that it's going to be for a one of the most expensive transfer fees of all time.
Here's the thing, Zach. Yeah, it's an average age of 26 in that team, and they don't have to sell. If Spalletti can keep that team together, De Laurentiis keeps that team together. They're sitting there. There's Eintracht Frankfurt in the Champions League. Maybe not this year, but next year, they could be a real threat in the Champions League. It would be a shame to break that team up. And here's the other thing about it. They have a couple of outstanding individuals. Osimhen's an outstanding individual, of course. And you look at some of the other players in the team that will no doubt, if they continue to play that way, they'll get big moves. But you look at that midfield, you're looking at Anguissa, right? These are system players. I could see Anguissa going to another team and being nowhere near as good enough. Labaka, Zielinski. They have to play in the right team. Kvaratskhelia will, of course, any team around the world will want to sign him. Osimhen will want to sign him. But, even if you look at Minjai and stuff, who, Spalletti's called the best defender in the world at the moment, these players needed Napoli.
You're 100% correct. And I think that, you go to the center of the pitch, that is where you can really see these players who are enjoying somewhat of a revival at the San Paolo. Zambo Anguissa, he's a player who made his name at Marseille in that run to the Europa League final, got a move to Fulham, didn't really work out there, bounced back on loan at Villarreal, and then finds his way back to Napoli on loan. Just a 15 million euro option to buy, to tell you of where Zambo was when he joined Napoli on loan last summer. But he's become a really key figure in that midfield. I think a great mix of physicality and technique. And I think that's what has made Napoli so deadly. You don't see that from other Italian teams right now. You watch teams like Inter, Juve, there's just something missing, right? And I think it's just clear, it's just night and day when you watch Napoli and compare them to other teams like Atalanta, Roma, whether it's the consistency, the mix of physicality or and technical ability, they're just running away with it. So I do agree with you. I think that they should be looking both short term and long term. This Napoli team has been one of the best teams in world football right now. I would add Benfica. You know how much I love my Portuguese teams, but they've been fantastic. Only one defeat so far. But for sure, Napoli have been absolutely fantastic. I think that not only are they running away with the Scudetto, but they have everything it takes to win the Champions League. I would honestly pick them. I would back them to win the Champions League. I think that as opposed to a team like Bayern or Paris Saint-Germain, who we've seen that when they wrap up the league title early, that can almost have a negative effect on their European form. You can see them sort of start to lose focus and perhaps drop in terms of performances. I think that having the Scudetto wrapped up is only going to motivate Napoli even further. They are also out of the Coppa Italia, so yeah, they are centered on two fronts, of course, but with an 18-point lead, you'd pretty much expect them to have this Scudetto wrapped up in the bag. And I think that with regards to the sales, because that's something that's going to happen in any Napoli fan's mind. That's just a reality that any Serie A team has to deal with. I think that Napoli they will have to sell at least one top player in the summer, but for sure you need to keep the bulk of that spine together because this is a special team. I know that Kim Min Jae, there's been reports that his release clause of 50 million euros is going to activate on July 1st, 2023. So their hands may be tied there. I suppose they will try to, try to put in a higher release clause for him. But yeah, what a phenomenal rise it's been for him to be playing in China just a few years ago. 1 year at Fenerbahce and now playing in Napoli and doing a phenomenal job has completely made Napoli fans forget about Koulibaly. So yeah, I would expect one player. I think that if they could just lose, Kim or Quara or Osimhen and then replace them and build out their squad depth, I think that there's a chance for them to not drop off too much. I think that's one thing that these past few months have really taught us, Phil. It's that if you are a team on that same level as Napoli, and that you need to rebuild your team, you need to get rid of some of these aging players, bring in some fresh new blood. You can still improve. You don't necessarily need an adaptation period. Okay, you don't need a rebuilding year where you're going to finish outside the top six. You can improve if you do your homework with the scouting, and that's what they've shown. So I think that they've done a phenomenal job. You've got veteran leaders in that team like Ahmed Rahmani or the captain Giovanni Di Lorenzo. You've got plenty of players who, as we mentioned, are kind of reviving themselves, reviving their careers, whether that's Stanislav Lobotka, Kangin Dombele, or Piotr Zielinski in the center of the pitch. But they've done a fantastic job. And I think that, you have to tip your hat to Luciano Spalletti. After so many years grinding his gears and managing in Italy, he is finally bringing Napoli back to the promised land and finally going to get the title that is going to, I think that is going to reward him for all the work that he has done.
But that brings me to the question of Christian Giuntoli, because he is the sporting director, relatively unknown across Europe. He has been largely responsible for this fantastic scouting and revitalising this Napoli team. Won't be long before people start to hear about him, and of course the fact that Spalletti is now being linked with the Spurs job to replace Antonio Conte. Do they risk losing Spalletti at the end of the season? And what do you know about Christian Giuntoli?
Yeah, Cristiano Giuntoli has done a fantastic job with this Napoli team, and I know that Juventus at the start of the season they were eyeing him as a potential answer to their sporting director vacancy. But yeah, he's somebody who has been working with this Napoli team for quite a few years. I think since 2015. So has really overseen Napoli at their highs, their highest of highs and their lowest of lows. This is a team that has gone through a lot over the past few years in the Sarri era, and of course collapsing in so many years where it seemed like they were going to win the Scudetto. And he's done a fantastic job, as I've mentioned, of getting rid of players at the right time, selling them for for decent fees. Looking at players such as Alan, Kalidou Koulibaly,
Forgot about
Yusuf
Alan.
Milik, and bringing in a fantastic mix of young players such as Victor Osimhen, Irving Lozano, and yeah, so many interesting young players. But I'll tell you what, I think that you have to give Giuntoli a ton of credit with the way that he has completely revitalized their attack. This is a Napoli team that, yes, it's got a very good goalkeeper. It's got some a solid balance in the center of the pitch and a great defense. But above all, it's got an attack that is going to really drive fear in any defense. You know, you've got arguably the most terrifying winger in world football right now in Kvicha Kvaratskhelia, and you've got not only Victor Osimhen, but some very good backup center forwards. Giacomo Raspadori having joined in the summer from Sassuolo, as well as Giovanni Simeone, also another summer arrival. So I think that you have to give Giuntoli and Spalletti a ton of credit for the way that they have handled this summer exodus and rebuilt their squad. I think that one thing that's done in terms of getting rid of these experienced players, it's brought in some fresh blood, players who are not mentally scarred from all of these Scudetto collapses, and really have more of a can-do spirit. They're not going to be weighed down by these nightmares of another late season collapse. They're just here to prove a point, to showcase their skills.
Yep.
And I just think that this Napoli team, for sure, I have no doubt that in a few years from now, we could be talking about it in the same sense of these, streets won't forget teams, right? Like Monaco 2016-17, Ajax 2018-19, quite a few. But to be honest with you, I think that they could be even a step further. If they can at least reach the Champions League final, I think that they've got a great chance of winning it. But if they can at least reach it, then that's something that's going to live on forever. And I think that they have a good chance of, really becoming the first complete outsider, complete underdog to go up against Europe's top teams and win the biggest trophy in club football since Porto 2003-2004. I don't think that there are too many teams who have been able to do that. Yes, you've got some fantastic comebacks like Liverpool and plenty of teams who have made it far, but in terms of underdogs, teams that frankly a lot of people didn't give a chance to, you cannot deny that Napoli are a fantastic Cinderella story. We're talking about a team that is essentially going to have the title wrapped up by the start of April. And think it back to just so many months back, we were not expecting Napoli to be in this position.
Yeah.
Milan coming off a Scudetto, Inter coming off a Coppa Italia and taking Milan to the final of the season, Juventus with some pretty heavy investment, and Roma coming off a Europa Conference final. I don't think even Napoli fans expected their team to be in this situation. So it's just, it's completely unprecedented what they have been able to achieve. Just 2 league defeats, if I'm not mistaken, and they've been absolutely flawless so far. So really hope they can cap it off with a European Cup, and hopefully keep hold of some of their key players for the next few months as well.
Well, another team that didn't expect to be in this position is Arsenal. Now, we chatted with Ollie K earlier. We asked him briefly about this, because there was no indication that this was going to happen at the start of the season. If you'd been picking your top 4, Arsenal weren't in it. There was no indication that Mikel Arteta was going to turn Arsenal into a championship winning team. In fact, I would love to have known what odds you'd have got at the start of the season for Arsenal to be in this situation. And so part of me wonders if he's being given enough credit, because I think part of what's been happening is lots of people have been watching Arsenal thinking there's going to be an inevitable collapse, and so we don't want to be too forthcoming with praise, but that hasn't happened. Mikel Arteta, I think, has done a truly unbelievable job, not just to get Arsenal sitting top, whether we've got the best league title race is irrelevant. To be sitting top ahead of Manchester City at this stage of the season in March, with a healthy lead at that, right? Having lost to City 2 weeks ago, where they easily, or was longer than that, where they easily could have precipitated a collapse. Every time Arsenal they went on a bit of a dodgy run. I think it was late December. They picked up 1.9, recovered. The fact they're winning games late isn't a fluke. Doesn't make them lucky. It shows that they have tremendous resilience. It's not just what he's done on the field. It's what he's done off the field. He got rid of Aubameyang. He got rid of Lacazette. He got rid of the players in the dressing room that he didn't feel were consistent with his values. He has them playing really good football. They've got excellent young players. He's made really good signings. I think City must regret selling Jesus and Zinchenko to Arsenal. And I do wonder how much it would hurt Guardiola to lose the league to his understudy. Right? And I look at this and I'm thinking, he has done a truly unbelievable job. Where's this come from?
Yeah, it has been a truly incredible season for Arsenal. And I think that one thing that is fairly similar between this Arsenal team and City teams of past is that when they do have a poor result, they'll almost instantaneously bounce back.
Yeah.
You look at the defeat to Manchester United back in September. They immediately bounced back with wins against Tottenham and Brentford and Liverpool, and we're able to go on a solid run of form. They draw to Southampton, bounce back with a 5-0 win against Nottingham Forest. Had a bit of a shaky run of form around the end of January, of course, losing to Manchester City in the Cup, losing to Everton to start February, and drawing to Brentford and then losing to City in the league. Since then, they have been able to beat Aston Villa and Everton and Bournemouth. And both of those games, the Bournemouth and the Villa game, they had to come from behind and secure a late victory. That's something that they've had to do on quite a few occasions. And I think that the Bournemouth game, conceding within 12 seconds or so, conceding another within 57 minutes, and then snatching a 3-2 win with a last-second winner from your academy product. I think that in a few months from now, if Arsenal do win the title, I think that we'll be sitting and saying to ourselves, you know what, that win against Bournemouth, that was the day that Arsenal won this title. Because if you can come back from that
whole week when they did the Villa comeback too, where they were it was 2 each with in injury time, they come back and score two. Yeah, I agree. I think that was a crucial week.
So they've shown all of what you can consider champions DNA, and for so many years, pretty much for the second half of the Wenger years, the media really referred to Arsenal as mentality midgets, a team that was going to crumble at the biggest of moments. Of course, we saw that with the, going back to the year that Leicester won the title. But now it just seems like they are so mentally resilient, and we can almost say that they're mentality monsters, the way that they've handled it. And so, yeah, they are currently 5 points clear of Manchester City. I think that with United being 16 points behind Arsenal with a game in hand, and without Casemiro for the next few games, I think we can pretty much say that it's going to be a 2-horse race for the title. I really don't see United getting back into it, especially with FA Cup and Europa League to worry about. But they'll be hoping that they just don't have a tough run to secure top four. So they'll be hoping to just bounce back. But it was always going to be tough for them to win the title this year. But yeah, with regards to Arsenal, I know that there's a lot of reason to be skeptical. I think that anybody who's spent the past 10 years or so watching Arsenal, they'll always have that in the back of their mind. They're going to collapse. Then Manchester City, they're inevitable. They're going to come back and snatch the title away. But I think that people need to realize that this is a City team that has won 4 of the last Premier League titles, and that has just added one of the best strikers in all of Europe in Erling Haaland. So the fact that Arsenal are in this position especially having played the past 2-3 months without Gabriel Jesus,
Yeah.
dealing with a lot of niggling injuries. They've done a phenomenal job, and I also think that yes, it would be a massive blow if they were to lose the title in this position, but it also wouldn't be the end of the world. Okay, I mean, you look at their squad. Apart from the center of the pitch with Granit Xhaka, Thomas Partey, Jorginho, Mohamed Elneny, pretty much all of their players are approaching their prime, as opposed
Odegaard's
to.
unbelievable.
So I think apart from a few players, as well as Leandro Trossard, who's had a fantastic impact since joining from Brighton in January, got himself a hat trick of assists against
Yeah.
Fulham. So been a
Weekend.
really important member of that team. But I think that apart from a few players, all of these players are going to get better. Okay, all of them are approaching their prime, and they are playing under a coach in Mikel Arteta who knows how to get the most out of young players. We've seen it with Bukayo Saka. We saw it at Manchester City with players such as Raheem Sterling. So he has done a fantastic job in getting this group to believe again, in clearing out so much of the deadwood and finding a spine that really works for everybody and that gets the most out of their players. So yeah, Arsenal, they're in a fantastic position. I expect them to win the Premier League. I think that Manchester City, they've looked a bit they've definitely looked second gear at a lot of times. I know they barely slipped by Crystal Palace to grind out a victory, and I almost think that with regards to City, their players know that ultimately they're going to be judged by what happens in Europe. They could pull off a fantastic comeback and end up winning the Premier League, and yet people are still going to judge them on what happens in the Champions League. So even if they were to come back and win the title, if they were to do that whilst losing to RB Leipzig in the round of 16, people I think would still judge them as a failure. So you compare that to Arsenal, where Europa League is almost a second thought, because they're pretty much guaranteed to qualify for the Champions League at the moment. They don't need to win Europa League to do so. It would be a nice cherry on top of the cake, but they are focused on one objective. City, on the other hand, I think they know that the standards have to be raised given the amount of investment, given what they have achieved on the domestic front, and I think that I think that that's a big difference when you compare the teams' performances. Arsenal, they just look a bit more focused and
But
composed. City, on the other hand, I do think that they've been a bit poor at times. But with that being said, they have so much quality in the likes of Kevin De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva, Haaland. They're going to be fighting for the title up until the very end.
let me ask you. I'm sure you watched Arsenal Sporting in the midweek. Why can't Arsenal translate their domestic form? And they never really have been able to do this into Europe.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think that Arsenal, these past few years have been quite different, quite weird for them because obviously they are used to playing Champions League football. So I think that to end up missing out on European football, to be playing Europa League, it is somewhat of an ego downer for them. But with regards to the Sporting match, I think that it wasn't a terrible result for them. I thought that Sporting were the better team; they deserved to have won. But Arsenal going into this game with a few players, a few backup players starting, such as Matt Turner, Jacob Kiwior, Reese Nelson, but overall a fairly strong lineup. Um, and I think that does show a lot about how much Arteta prioritizes this competition. Yes, he's caring about the weekend game at Fulham, but he really does want to change the mentality and make sure that Arsenal go far in this competition, which frankly they have the quality to do. I think that I look at the teams in this competition. I think that Arsenal and Manchester United have the two strongest teams in the competition. So yeah, they should be aiming to win it. But I do think that the fact that Champions League football is already wrapped up, that's definitely something that's playing in their minds. I would expect Arteta to go for a stronger lineup in the second leg in London. Would probably expect Gabriel Magalhaes in the back line with William Saliba and probably have Leandro Trossard involved. But yeah, I think that Sporting, they made it an interesting match on Thursday, and I expect it to be another interesting match in the second leg in London.
All right, my friend, let's switch the conversation to a young Brazilian starlet. Each week we're going to take a look at different young players around the world, and I'm going to tap into Zach's superior knowledge on these players. Young superstar by the name of Victor Roque, I hope I'm saying this correctly, you'll correct me if I said it wrong. Young Atletico Paranaense wingers forward. He was named in the Copa Lib Team of the Year 2022, making a lot of headlines around Europe. Lots of clubs are taking a long, hard look at this kid. Tell me, what are we looking at here? Are we looking at the next superstar from Brazil?
Definitely one of them. I think that looking at Victor Roque, his profile, his strengths, it's really hard to not be excited by this player. This is someone who I believe is just 18 years of age. I think actually 17 years of age, and has already gone for a lot of money in terms of his transfers. It's already started in a Copa Libertadores final for Atletico Paranaense. So yeah, he's a player who has an incredibly bright future and has been doing very well. This is a player who I think has drawn comparisons to Ronaldo as any young Brazilian striker. He started out at Cruzeiro's academy, has played in the Campeonato Mineiro, has played under Luis Felipe Scolari. Potentially will go to Barcelona like Ronaldo, but I would like to point people in the direction of a really good article that we did on Breaking the Lines. That's BTL did on Twitter, where we discussed Vitor Roque by Peter Pankowski, and he has definitely watched a bit more of Vitor than I have, and he said that two players that are similar to Vitor are Carlos Tevez and Sergio Aguero. And so when you watch him play, you can definitely see those similarities. That kind of small but ferocious bulldog like striker. He's somebody who is undersized but isn't necessarily going to be pushed around either. Got a good strength to his game, and I think that lack of height is also going to translate in him dropping around the final third. Vacating central areas and getting into places where he can pick up the ball and turn and utilize his speed. And yeah, he's somebody who's done very well in the goal scoring department. He's somebody who gets into fantastic positions with his constant work rate off the ball and his movement. So yeah, I think that there's a lot to like about Vitor Roque. This is a player who is going to have a very bright future, and I would expect him to be getting a big move to Europe soon. Atletico Paranaense, they are no secret. They are no strangers to selling their players to big European clubs, as we've seen with Bruno Guimaraes, Renan Lodi. But yeah, he's a player who is really exciting, and I think that Barcelona are going to be looking at him as a potential long-term heir to Robert Lewandowski.
You think so? You think Barcelona is a realistic destination for him at this point, or is there anyone else that like him?
I think that when Vitor does make the move to Barcelona, when he does make the move to Europe, it will be for a top level club. I can't see him, going to Europe and joining a club like Bologna, for example. I think that he's destined for a top tier side, and you look at his numbers: 11 appearances and 9 goals, 2 assists for Atletico and Brazil's U20 side. So he's somebody who, is consistently finding the back of the net at 17 years of age. And when you look at just how rare those kind of talents are, I think that it's just going to be undeniable that he's going to get a big move. He's somebody who has actually already triggered some bureaucratic uh, drama with regards to his transfers. Cruzeiro were
Yeah.
forced to were excluded from several competitions actually because of their transfer for him in terms of buying back his rights. So there's been a lot of attention on Vitor for quite a while, and he's taken it all in stride and improved. It's very hard for a player to do that, especially with Brazilian players. There's always so much attention on them, and we've seen a lot of them struggle to deal with it. And we've talked a lot about Endrick. He's had some struggles since penning the contract and joining Real Madrid. He's been failing to score, and it seems like that the headlines are taking a toll on him. So I think that
Yeah,
Roque,
they're so
for him
young.
to be able to stay composed and stay focused on improving his craft, it really is a testament to what kind of player he is. But yeah, he's somebody who is not only a physical beast, but is also very intelligent, is capable of exploiting the space and drifting into the final third and finding the back of the net. He's somebody who is going to keep on improving. And yeah, I would definitely expect to be playing for a top level club soon.
Okay, mate, we'll go ahead and leave it there because we're going to add the IK part into this. We'll make it just over an hour podcast, an hour 20 minutes. Thanks to all of you for watching, for downloading the podcast. We'll be back every Monday, and we look forward to having you join us. Go ahead and you can drop myself or Zach a tweet. If there's anything you want us to cover on the show, we'll go ahead and cover it. We'll have some guests later on in the week. We'll have Jonathan Johnson on to talk about what is going on at Reims and Nasser Al Khalifa, and of course Ashraf Hakimi and a few other things in French football. Keep watching and keep downloading. Much appreciated. Zach, you take it easy, brother.